Hey, what's up guys? It's Rick with the Digital Divide. Now, I love thrift shopping. I love going to flea markets, yard sales, antique stores, that kind of thing. It's so fun to do because you never know what you're going to find. We all hope that we'll find a $1 million book lying in a bin somewhere that somebody found in their attic, so that we can retire and live out our days on a beach somewhere. But although that rarely happens, it's still really fun to go out, and I've found so many really cool and valuable things while doing this, so I figured I'd start a series kind of documenting this. So the first place I went to today is an antique store downtown called Emporium Antiques, and this is in downtown Frederick, Maryland, where I live. This is the inside of the store. Now, right off the bat, I can kind of tell this is going to be a more traditional antique store, and they're going to have a lot of furniture and things like that. The first thing that caught my eye is this children's book. Just the artwork on the front looked kind of creepy. It's called The Tale of Daddy Longlegs, which is part of the Tuck Me In tales. There's also this like African-looking mask that is right next to a pile of stamps. People collect antique stamps, apparently. Not my thing, but I do respect the age of it. It's just neat to see this kind of stuff. This is some Queen Elizabeth silver 25th anniversary stamps from 1952. Looks like over here we've got a pile of what appears to be shares for the Central Foundry Corporation. This is 100 shares. And there's just a pile of these for various corporations. There's also a bunch of like Civil War era black and white photography here, some of which are in the original frame, which is kind of neat to see. But again, not something I'm looking for, not something that I collect. Over here, I did see an H.G. Wells science fiction treasury book. That was really tempting, but I did not pick it up. There was also this Lone Ranger poster. It looks like some kind of shooting target, but it was made in 1938, so it's got a lot of history behind it. There were also a bunch of these like die-cast metal replica cars that I thought were cool looking. This one is like a presidential limo, and you know, the trunk opens, the doors open. It's very detailed, but not something I collect right now. There were a ton of really amusing books that were incredibly old. This one is called Buddy and His Cowboy Pal. You can just tell by looking at it, this thing is ancient. Looks like nobody's claimed this book yet, but this is from 1935, so it's just neat to see all of these books in the original binding in relatively decent condition. Some of the names on here are hilarious. This one's called The Devil's Garden, so that one looks a bit scandalous. And they just had stacks and stacks of books. These in particular weren't as old as the ones that I just showed you, but I did go through them to see if there was anything of interest. I like like authors like Jules Verne, for example, see if there's anything worth picking up. Next booth, I found a bunch of antique cameras. These were really cool looking, and if you're into photography, maybe this is something you'd like to collect, but not something that I'm into. There was also a Donald Duck and Charlie Brown figures that looked to be fairly old. Now this was really cool. This was like a 3.5 foot tall Betty Boop statue. If I had the room to display this, I would 100% buy this to put in the man cave, but I just don't have the space. And then there were also these Looney Tunes wine stoppers that looked interesting as well. In the next room, I found a bunch of old swords. This one is an African tribal short sword for $95. It looks really interesting. This one caught my eye. This is an Indian Ferengi sword with an early European blade and iron hilt. The artwork on this is amazing, and considering the age, it's in really great condition, and I didn't pick it up because I don't need more hobbies to suck up all of my expendable income, but maybe someday I'll start collecting these. It just looks really cool, and I appreciate the history behind it. Now, this was awesome. This really caught my attention, and I was so tempted to pick it up. It's an old Indian war axe for $250. Now, I also found a pair of Derringer pocket pistols. These are not something I come across often, and they were less than $100. I was, again, incredibly tempted to pick them up. So this place turned out to be a bust. I didn't buy anything here, so we're moving on to the next place. And the next place I checked out is also in downtown Frederick. It's called Cannon Hill Place Antique, and it's only about a 5-minute walk from the other place that I showed you. This place is a bit more eccentric. They have a lot of weird stuff, and I'm kind of into it. And when I say weird, I mean like a lot of taxidermy stuff, like these snapping turtles, alligator heads. There's just a lot of this kind of thing. They have taxidermied birds that are quite impressive as well, as you can see here. In the next room, they had some instruments. They had a handful of acoustic guitars. I already have some guitars, and I'm horrible at guitar, so I don't need another one. They also had this violin. It was only $100. It was missing a few strings, but that's still a pretty good deal. They also had this really creepy-looking oil painting of some kind of demon thing. And then in the next room, they had these collectible baseball cards, which I could not care less for. I did notice these Mets ones. My dad is a big Mets fan. They also had a bunch of Marilyn Monroe artwork. This I would be super into. And they had this Coca-Cola Party Barbie, which I've never seen before. I thought that was odd, as well as a Mr. Peanut. Now, in the next room, they had a bunch of CDs, and then finally something that I'm interested in, which is these amazing Star Trek replica ships, including a Reliant, which I need in my collection. In this amazing Enterprise with the yellow on top, the NX-01. I need this so badly. The reason I didn't pick it up is because I took my electric bike here. I didn't have a proper way of bringing them back to my place without damaging the boxes, so I'm definitely coming back to get all of these. Moving on upstairs, we finally find the first comic book related thing. It's a Mighty Thor origin story hardback book. Just not something I collect. This is not a comic book, it's just kind of the history of Thor, so I passed on that. Got some NASCAR stuff here and some fantasy figures, and then this Star Trek board game really caught my attention because it looked old, but then I realized that it's the next generation, so it can't be that old. And I flipped it around. Turns out this thing is only from 1993. I was tempted to pick it up, but realistically, it's not something that I'm going to play, and I don't really collect board games, so I passed on that. Moving on to the next room, we have another comic book related thing. It looks like somebody just cut the cover off of a comic book and then put it in a frame. So I skipped on that, not something I collect. This was weird. It's a Cabbage Patch Kids e-adoption kit, or e-adoption kit. I've never seen that before. There was also Elvis record here. Almost tempted to pick that up, but I passed. There was also a Woody figure from Toy Story, but he was missing the hat. I saw some Star Trek stuff in the back that piqued my interest, but it turned out just to be a calendar, which I don't collect, so I skipped on that as well. Moving on to our last antique store. And again, I took the e-bike out today, and I took it a good 20 plus miles, and the battery did not die. If you've seen my review on the Jetson Bolt Pro, you'll know what that is. The last antique shop we're checking out today is Old Glory Antique Marketplace. This is actually where I picked up everything that I bought today. So as soon as you walk in, you see a bunch of sports trading cards, and again, I couldn't care less about these. They're not valuable at all, and it's just not something I collect. If these were Marvel trading cards, I'd be all over it, but this stuff, it's not something I'm into. But they had a ton of it, so if you're in the Frederick area and you're into that sort of thing, go to this place. Now, this was the first huge collection of comic books that I found. There were multiple long boxes, and this got me very excited, although a lot of it was like late 90s trash, so I went ahead and looked through every single box, and that took me quite a while. Ultimately, there was nothing in there worth buying, so I moved on to the next booth. Now, this is something you don't see every day. It's a working gas mask, and then I found a bunch of albums. I'm starting to collect more vinyl. They had some Michael Jackson, some Billy Joel stuff, decent stuff. They also had a bunch of Walt Disney 15-cent comic books. Now, I collect comic books, obviously, but I don't collect the Disney comic books. They don't have a ton of value, and I didn't grow up reading comic books. I grew up watching the cartoons and movies, so that's where my nostalgia comes from when it comes to that. But I did find another stack of comic books, and this was Ghost Rider and a lot of older Luke Cage stuff. And this got me excited, so I called the attendant over who opened up the case. I took a look at all of these books. I almost picked up one of the Luke Cage books, but they were asking for way more than it goes for on eBay. The next thing I found here of interest appears to be like a welder's helmet. I've never seen that before. And then there was some old Disney-related memorabilia as well. And then I found another pile of comic books. And the first one was The Lone Ranger. I don't collect any Western stuff, so immediately skipped that. And underneath that were some X Factor comics. Now, I went through all of these. I just skimmed through them, and there was really nothing of note that I was interested in. There was one West Coast Avengers book, but I already had that one. And the rest of them were just X Factor books that weren't any significant keys, and I'm not trying to complete a run on that particular series, so I ended up passing on these. I also found like a really old Mickey Mouse looking doll. And then I moved on to another booth, and I found some slabs, which is really, really uncommon. Now, this particular slab was the first solo run for Red Sonja, and they were only asking for 115, so I was very tempted. But I don't really collect Conan or Red Sonja stuff, so I passed on that, although this is the booth where I found my favorite book of the day. They also had some Captain America stuff up top, and I did look through all of these to see if there's anything of note, and I only ended up getting one book at that booth, but again, it was my favorite. There was some Ghost Rider and Fantastic Four stuff as well that I took a look at. There was one book that was even signed, and then some DC stuff, but I don't really collect a whole lot of DC stuff. So moving on to another booth, I found this Captain America Marvel Masterworks book. This is, I guess it's like a history book outlining Captain America. There was also another small stack of comics, but these were almost entirely Doctor Who and the Green Hornet, neither of which I have any interest in. I don't collect those. And then there was one Richie Rich book. The final comic book related booth that I took a look at had a bunch of Life magazines here, and then they had some old vintage metal stamped Disney toys, a couple of vinyl records, jazz related, and then there were some military toys here, and then this is the big pile of comic books. The last one that I looked at here, and this is where I picked up the last few comic books of the day. As I walked to a different aisle, I saw this PlayStation display case, and I got so excited because I thought this would be perfect for my nerd room, but then I realized that they were using it to display jewelry, so it wasn't for sale. I also found this really cool Garfield lunchbox that I almost picked up, but again, I took the e-bike here, so I didn't have a lot of room to carry stuff on the way back home. They also had a bunch of old Jigsaw puzzle games and figures. And then there was also some Care Bear figures from the late 80s, early 90s. Now, I did find some original 1977 Star Wars figures. I almost got that R2-D2, but it's loose and it was an accessory for a bigger set. In the next booth, I found a bunch of really old DC figures, and this got me super excited. These are really, really old. You can see that they had a bunch of like old Halloween costumes from like the 50s and the 60s, and they had some old toys. These were all loose, nothing in the box, but still hard to find. They also had some 80s Transformer figures. Again, these are all loose, nothing in the box. And then they had some Star Wars stuff at the top and a big Voltron figure. This Batman figure is what caught my eye when I went to this booth. I was really, really interested in it. Ultimately, I didn't end up buying it because the Batman emblem on his chest is missing. It was either cut out or I don't know what happened to it, but it's gone. I did call the attendant to take it out. They wanted $45 for it. If it was complete, I absolutely would have bought it. And then there's a 3CPO figure at the top here that I was interested in as well, but not for $250. In the next booth, I found some Snow White vintage figures here that looked interesting, and a bunch of old vintage Disney stuff. And these look to be from the 50s or 40s, as well as these old G-Man or G-Men crime novels. These are like little tiny books that were made to be easy to carry around, and just really interesting to see. A lot of this is old, like stamped metal. It's not the cheap plastic that they make toys out of now. And then they had a bunch of like military toys as well. I just thought this was neat. It's not something that I really collect, so I passed on these, but I thought it was cool to see. And then finally, on my way out, I found what appears to be an old flare gun and some holsters, and then some really sketchy German memorabilia from World War II. There was a really cool German World War II sword that I found, as well as some 1991 Topps reprints of the 53 era set of baseball cards. Had those been the original, I might have been interested, but not reprints. And then there was a bunch of really nice looking swords here as well. So ultimately, my haul was pretty slim. I didn't pick up much. The first book I grabbed was Avengers number 240, and this was by accident. This is not the book I meant to pick up. I had a stack of books that I was interested in, and a stack I wasn't interested in, and I was in a hurry on the way out, so I grabbed this one by mistake. But the book I meant to get was the Avengers number 246, which is the first appearance of Maria Rambeau. Oh well. The next book I picked up was Ghost Rider number 56. This was in great shape. It's not a huge key, but it is the first appearance of the Phantom Rider, so I picked this one up. It was just a few bucks, and it's in really good condition, so I figured why not. The next book I picked up is The Invincible Iron Man number 146. Again, not a huge, massive key, but this is the first appearance of Backlash. And again, it was in great condition, and it was only a few bucks, so I picked it up. The next book I picked up is Iron Man number 186. This is the first appearance of an Iron Man villain called Vibro. Again, not a major key, but it was $3, so I figured why not. Now, my favorite pickup of the day, without a doubt, is this book. It's Marvel Presents Bloodstone number 1. This is the introduction to the Bloodstone family in Marvel Comics. It's the first appearance of Ulysses Bloodstone. And if you're wondering who that is, if you watched the Werewolf by Night show that just came out...
Good luck. I'll be rotting for you.
Yeah, he's the dead guy in the coffin, and they're all fighting over his Bloodstone. Now, he has two daughters. One is Elsa Bloodstone, who was also introduced in that same show, as well as Lyra Bloodstone, who was just introduced this year and is already one of the most powerful Marvel characters. She learned how to control her powers under the mentorship of Doctor Strange in the comics. So with the introduction of monsters into the MCU, I think the Bloodstone family and the Bloodstone itself is going to play a major factor into the MCU going forward. Now, this copy is in amazing condition, considering the age. Here are some pictures for you to take a look at. It is in immaculate condition, in my opinion, and I think this is definitely a 9.8 contender, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited about it. I don't see any defects with the book that can't be easily pressed out, and so not only do I love the book itself, but it's worth quite a bit of money at a high grade. You can see the last few 9.8 copies of this sold at about $1,000, so I spent 20 bucks on the book. I'm definitely sending in to get graded, and I can't wait to see what it comes back as. That's going to do it for me today, guys. As always, thanks for watching. If you have any recent pickups you want to share, leave it in the comments below, and I'll be happy to check it out.